Oh, I guess we'll let the music play twice. No, we'll pause it there. Little technical snafu, but good evening, folks. Galen Clavio here, live from Altadena for one last time on this trip as Indiana pulls off a historic win in so many ways. They knock off the Alabama Crimson Tide 38-3 in an absolute domination of a team that many people expected to come in and beat Indiana, at least many people in the national media. Indiana, you give the media 2 weeks and they'll find a way to create some doubt about Indiana. And then Indiana goes in this year and shows everybody why those doubts were foolish. And this was one of those games where, I've thought about it. I've gone back and watched the highlights. I really have a hard time coming up with much to criticize. It wasn't a perfect game, but it was close to a perfect game from Indiana, where, outside of a couple of possessions early on, Indiana did what they needed to do when they needed to do it. They dictated the pace of the game. They dictated the physicality of the game. Um, th- they played at a level that I don't think we've ever seen Indiana play. Um, and I mean that from this perspective. This stage against a team that, I think there were some questions about whether Alabama was, maybe the ninth best team or the 10th best team or the 11th best team. Maybe they were right on the borderline of whether they should have been in the playoff. I, and, I'm sure some people will try to come back and say, well, Alabama wasn't that good. They shouldn't have been in the playoff. Well, let's not get it twisted. Alabama was a very good football team. Statistically speaking, as much as we look at S&P Plus and FPI, Alabama was right up there. And, they were a top 10 team according to almost any of the metrics that you would look at. This was not a case where Indiana dominated a weak opponent. This wasn't Indiana playing a G5 school, or Indiana playing a lesser team from the Big Ten. This was Indiana utterly dominating the Alabama Crimson Tide, a team with a litany of 4 and 5 star players, with the pedigree, with every single aspect of what you would classify as a championship program. So we got a lot to talk about as far as what that means, how what we witnessed, and how to process it. First, a couple of quick reminders for you. First of all, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. I say this every time I go on the road. So much Home Field Apparel in the stands, Alabama fans as well as IU fans. And man, people wore it proud today on the Indiana side. It was just awesome to see. They've already dropped a new set of merch commemorating this win over Alabama in the Rose Bowl. So go over to homefieldapparel.com and go check that out and use the code HOME23 to get 15% off your first order. Again, the folks at Home Field have been great. They have partially sponsored the Stampede to Pasadena. It was, it's been a partnership we've enjoyed for so long. So hopefully you'll go check out the new stuff that they've got, as well as all the other great designs that they've been pumping out here throughout the college football playoff. Also, just a reminder, folks, we partnered with Bluegrass Distillers for that Tournament of Roses oaked bourbon. That it's a really, really, we had a celebratory glass after we got home from the game today. It's a really, really good tasting bourbon. So just on flavor alone, I'd really recommend checking it out. And you're going to want the bottle. Especially now. Indiana won the Rose Bowl for the first time in history. You're going to want the commemorative bottle. as Bluegrass Distillers partnered with the Tournament of Roses Parade and the Pasadena Tournament of Roses for the sponsorship. So it's got the Rose Bowl logo right on it. You're going to want that on your shelf down the line. So you can go to Bluegrass Distillers website. You can order directly there. I would recommend picking some up. I think it's going to be a pretty hot item here over the next couple of weeks. So we thank them for their support as well. Anyway, let's get into this. Let's talk about things. First of all, let's get some comments. Our buddy Ta Lau sending love from Thailand to all Crimson Cast listeners. Sir, it's great to see you in the comments. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for tuning in. I'm not even sure what time it is in Thailand, but glad you're in the mix here. Um, Brandon saying I'm supposed to be going to bed, but we're live now. I mean, I I haven't been able to sleep yet. I'm still processing everything in my brain. I appreciate you all tuning in. Heavenly Strains. My mother was an Indiana football season ticket holder for over 40 years. The dream was to attend the Rose Bowl game. She passed away 2 years ago. I wish she could have seen this. Go Hoosiers. I know. I I know so many people who have shared similar sentiments. I was talking to somebody at the Rose Bowl today, and they were talking about how they were there with their dad, and their dad had had some really bad health issues, but they really wanted to make it out to this because they've been season ticket holder for decades, have been coming to games. I just heard so many stories of Indiana fans who made the trek out here. It was such a pro IU crowd. It was 75, 80% IU fans. IU fans just absolutely dominated the noise, the energy. And it was cool to me seeing Indiana fans of all ages enjoying this game, enjoying this team. You know, you always take a bit of a leap of faith with these sorts of things. And we've certainly been around enough travel sporting events over the course of our time as IU people. We know that they don't always go well. Anybody who I remember all the people that like traveled in 2013 to Washington, D.C. for the Sweet 16 game against Syracuse. There have been some empty trips in both sports over the course of time. And so, one of the things about this game that I think is so special is the number of people who put everything on hold, who spent money they maybe didn't have readily available, got, really expensive plane tickets, or there's the folks like me that drove, but that took 2 days, 3 days out of their life to do it. There's always the possibility you're not going to get a payoff for that. And so when you do, it makes those moments really special. And that so many people who are connected to Indiana football emotionally were here to see this occur. What a great payoff. Not just for the faith and putting the money down and taking the trip, but what a payoff for those people who have been connected to IU football for so many years as fans, as former players, as former staff members. It was probably the most overwhelming aspect of the whole thing, as I've thought back on it, is there were a lot of tears, a lot of emotion in the stands from a lot of people. And some people were just joyful. Other people were emotional about it because it just it, it, it it felt like such a distant possibility, like not even a possibility for so long, for so many people. And it's been such a whirlwind these last 2 years that you almost haven't had time to kind of process that Indiana keeps moving up this chain. And winning a Rose Bowl is something that very few programs get to do. And the fact that Indiana did it and now moves on in the college football playoff to the semifinal and beat Alabama just like dominantly. As Justin says, what a dominant performance. It absolutely was. But that's like an extra payoff on top of just the success. Is like you got to go watch your team essentially make a college football playoff quarterfinal boring. It was a blowout. Alabama didn't want to play anymore halfway through the third quarter. I mean, it was an absolute masterclass. And you know, uh, Trent noting this was yet another Signetti masterpiece. Absolutely incredible coaching job in terms of preparation, game plan, and execution. And yet, it felt like something we've come to expect from this team. I couldn't agree more. This is, when you hear Signetti talk about the standard, We have a tendency in punditry and in reporting to look at those things and say, oh, that's just coach speak. What does that even mean? And certainly, I think when the first few times I heard Signetti talk that way, I'm like, okay, here's a coach doing coach speak. This is the mantra, though. This is what they program the players to think. And this is what their messaging is based around. And it can feel uneven. We've seen programs not be able to pull off what they say they're going to with that kind of thing. But the methodological approach that Signetti and his coaching staff take to scouting, to putting their players in position to be successful, to holding players to a certain standard, and to make it just this repeatable thing is very it's unusual, and it's thrilling once you get into it. It's a process that it has the potential to get results for a long time if you have the right players in the system. And again, like the game plan was note perfect. Indiana knew what they needed to do. They knew how to grab a hold of the game. And then defensively, what I thought was fascinating was they really were patient, knowing that they were essentially letting Ty Simpson make all of the throws, or at least putting him in a position where he was going to have to throw the ball successfully every time. And rather than a ton of blitzes, they said, well, we're going to make him constantly have to make the right plays against the defenses that we're throwing out there. And yeah, there was pressure, and they flushed him out of the pocket some, and they got him uncomfortable. But it wasn't um, the no holds barred approach that we saw in terms of the pass rush in the Ohio State game. This was a different game. It was a really maturely called game, and it relied on the idea that you could give Simpson 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 yards even in a drive, but you were going to stop him before Alabama got into a position where they could do anything important with the ball. And that held true for essentially the entire game, except for the one drive where Alabama kicked a field goal rather than even scoring a touchdown. Offensively, amazing game plan. I saw the stat earlier. Alabama blitzed 12 times in this game, and Mendoza was 8 for 8 for 161 yards and three touchdowns on those plays where they blitzed. That's a team being coached by coaches who knew exactly what to look for. And as I think I mentioned a couple of nights ago, used Alabama's aggression against them, made it so that their aggression opened up possibilities. And then they took advantage of the possibilities. So yeah, it was a great performance by the coaching staff and obviously the players in executing that vision and that plan. And you put that in with the physicality that Indiana demonstrated on both sides of the ball. Defensively, obviously, D'Angelo Pons knocks out Ty Simpson with rib injury and knocks the ball free and generates the turnover that leads to the final touchdown of the half. But there were similar hits like that happened pretty constantly throughout. Indiana was out to make life very difficult on Alabama, make life very physical. And, for all of the garbage that we heard for 2 weeks about how talented the SEC is and how, Indiana's defense couldn't be better than Oklahoma's defense or LSU's defense. After all that nonsense, Indiana went out and played the defensive game that Oklahoma couldn't manage in either of the games. They played the defensive game that LSU couldn't manage. This was a true defensive performance, and it really was. It was something I'll go back and watch many times because it was really efficiently executed throughout. And that's the luxury Indiana's got right now is they've got coaches who understand what to do in these situations, and they keep learning every year. I don't think Brian Haynes calls that play or calls that game last year, and this year he knew exactly what buttons to push. There's a maturity and a development even amongst the coaches where they're just getting better all the time. And you add that to the players and the way that the players have executed. It's really exciting stuff. Um, yeah, and Brandon noting, I'm so happy we got to see a Signetti spine buster in the playoffs. I agree. As much as winning in the college football playoff will be an immense thing for recruiting for the brand of Indiana football, to do what they did in this game against Alabama is going to be eye-opening for people. All year you think back at the various stages of things. They go into the Illinois game, and it's like, oh, Illinois can pass the ball, and Illinois is going to be really hard to stop. No, they do that. Well, Illinois must not have been that good, but Oregon, you're not going to go in and beat Oregon like it's not happening. And then you go in and beat Oregon by double digits, and you just keep going down the list. Ohio State, everybody picks Ohio State except for one or two people, and there's Signetti really does get fueled by disrespect, and he channels that feeling of being disrespected into spine busting, into breaking the will of an opponent. It's what he enjoys doing more than anything else. And they couldn't. Obviously, the Ohio State game was a very, very difficult game. Two teams playing at the height of their powers. You're not going to bust any spines there. But I mean, oh, excuse me. A little. It's been a long day, obviously. Um, I made a comment to the people I was sitting with about in the third quarter. I was like, this feels like UCLA all over again. It felt like one of those games. Like as much as we heard people talk about Indiana's supposedly weak schedule and how, well, it doesn't matter if you beat Michigan State by 30 or UCLA by 50. This felt like Indiana UCLA part two. It felt like a team that was a couple of notches above their opponent, and basically a team that got worn down over the course of the first quarter and a half, and then just laid wide open while Indiana did whatever they wanted the last two and a half quarters. To be able to see that on display nationally, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, I didn't see those games. I didn't watch those Indiana games." Everybody watched this game. Everybody watched this game. Everybody saw what Indiana did. That's going to be huge. And I'm glad for those people who have conveniently not watched any Indiana and are drawing a bunch of conclusions based upon highlights. I'm glad they got a chance to see this. Um, and maybe it will give people a little bit of pause in the future about poo-pooing what Indiana's done because of a supposedly weak schedule. It's easy to think your opponent's weak when a team beats them by 40 or 35, but sometimes it's just because the team is that damn good and not because their opponent is bad. Yes, I also hope the local five-star wide receivers are paying attention. I think they are. You're not going to win every recruiting battle. And the thing is, Signetti and his crew only really bring in guys that fit the system and have the right attitude. And, they talk about character all the time. What you saw on the field tonight was a great example of why they recruit that way, why they bring guys in the portal that way. And the refrain throughout the last month has been how special this group is, how tuned in they are with each other. That's a character thing. That's recruiting to a particular type of personality. And so the five stars, if they have that personality, let's get them here. If they don't, y- I mean, you don't need them because you can find a three-star or a two-star or a zero-star with the right attitude and the right set of skills that maybe just needs the coaching at this point. I like this comment. They're so good, it's boring. I had a couple of people mention that. You know what? Good. It's time for Indiana to be the dominant, boring team. That's not something that we ever thought we were going to have. Um, yeah, Robert's saying, still can't believe this is reality. First bowl win in 35 years, and it's the Rose Bowl. I know, it blows my mind. Also, how funny we're going back to the Peach Bowl for a third time. And yeah, it's true. And, those were two tough losses. I remember those very clearly. Tennessee and then Auburn, both close games and both games that got away from at the very end. Um, yeah, I have to say the game was damn dominant. Everyone on the field looks so pro. I'm on cloud nine. First and only one seed to win a CFP game. I think it's a wild stat. I mean, we talked about this a couple days ago where I really still think that the one seed thing is a bit overblown. And even this year, it, I do think there's some coincidental items involved in all of these losses. Indiana wins because Indiana was just a superior team. And um, you think about the other three games that happened this year, Oregon was a better team than Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech was, there was always the question about whether Texas Tech was actually as good as they were, because all they did was essentially accomplish their schedule against Big 12 teams. And a lot of those Big 12 teams, I think, had some questions about how good they were. Ohio State, maybe we need to reevaluate Ohio State and say, well, Ohio State can bully teams, but when Ohio State plays teams that have physically imposing lines, they look very average. And you think about it, like Indiana and Miami combined for 10 of the 16 sacks on the season that Ohio State gave up. I mean, that tells you something. And you figure, you go back and look at that Texas game. And as much as people tried to blame the lack of offensive production on Julian Sang having his first start, the reality is, or maybe it's not the reality, but a possible different reality is that maybe Texas just made a lot of problems for Ohio State. Maybe Ohio State wasn't as good as everybody thought, but it really was only exposed when they played teams with real high level caliber talent on the defensive front. And then Georgia losing tonight. I mean, you shouldn't be shocked by that. You shouldn't be shocked by it because Georgia nearly lost to Ole Miss in the regular season at home. Georgia lost to Ole Miss last year. That wasn't that much of a surprise. So the bye thing in the playoff is, I don't know if it's that much of a factor because I think there's other explanations that can provide why a lot of those teams lose. But it's great that Indiana wasn't one of them. But again, I think it's because Indiana was just that dominant. Let's see what else we got from you folks. Cool. Cabe says, "Welcome, greetings from the Eastern Time Zone." I appreciate that. Bear's Mouth, what a day! 100%, 100%. Like I still can't get my head wrapped around it. I'm going to talk about the day here in a second. Are we doing a Peach Bowl meetup? We're going to work on it. I've not had time to plan. I'm going to work on that tomorrow as we drive back to Indiana. We'll map some stuff out, and I'll have some information for you folks. Colin saying, "I was sitting right next to a gentleman who was at the 68 Rose Bowl. It was amazing to enjoy the win with him afterwards." I know. It was great. I connected with a couple of folks like that. It was just amazing to connect with them and um, just how overjoyed they were. Um, oh my God, I wish I'd been there. My heart rate is still not returned to normal. It's funny because it was a different kind of game because Indiana dominated so significantly. It was one of those games where it wasn't like the Ohio State game where it was just like your heart's racing the whole time and you're constantly nervous. I mean, Indiana kind of had this in the bag at halftime. And you always worry like, oh, Alabama's going to come back out and they could score, and then it's suddenly a 10-point game, and Indiana snuffed that out immediately. Um, and so, look, it's these are great games to have because you can look back on them. I felt this way about the Oregon game after a while. As tight as that felt, it wasn't that tight. Indiana winning by 10. Yeah, they had to drive in the fourth quarter to take the lead, but they had been dominant the whole game. This obviously this is a much bigger domination, but it's nice to have these games where you don't have to feel like everything is on the table all the time. Let's see what else we got. Jay says this sounds like hyperbole, but I don't think I've ever seen a better story in sports. This team is everything you want a team to be. There's no choppiness, no BS, no overriding ego. It is really fascinating to think about how great of a story this is, and people keep trying to come up with comps for it, and it doesn't really, they don't exist. I mean, it's so unique. It makes no sense. Um, what Kurt Signetti has been able to do in 2 years in a sport that is notoriously hard to flip the script on. I mean, college football is maybe outside of the English Premier League amongst the most parochial and exclusive sports in terms of how to get to the top. It's not like the NFL where you can have a few good drafts and make some good free agent signings and flip your roster. It's never been something that you can do. in college football, and yet here we are. Wild. It's wild. And then as you mentioned, Jay, all the personality aspects of the team. And I mean, it's just such a likable group of guys. And it's a group of guys who want to prove to people that they can play football at the highest level. And it's a person like Fernando Mendoza who's just, we'll be talking about Fernando Mendoza's personality for years to come, and for good reason. The guy is just an original. And for him to go out and go 14 for 16, throwing the ball with three touchdowns to three different receivers, with scrambling all over the place and extending drives. I mean, it was a masterclass. Was it Fernando Mendoza's best game all the way around? It might have been. It might have been. Um, I mean, he made big plays in the Ohio State game, but this was such a complete performance that had good stats behind it as well. Let's see. Harpoon Baker says you were exactly right about my major concern about Stephen Daly. You were spot on. This is what I was trying to say. And look, I think that your question was good. I think the problem with this to some degree was people get caught up in the stats, and people get caught up in this idea that there have to be like for like replacements. And because a lot of teams there is that's how it has to work. And the thing about Daly's injury is as sad as it was. I think the national media was looking for something to seize onto to say, here's why Indiana could lose. Oh, they lost their leading TFL guy. They lost this big disruptor. That's going to really cause problems. And that gives us the pathway to being able to see Alabama winning. But in reality, Indiana's defense doesn't work like that. And you think about if you watch the defense closely, they were using different formations, they were shifting people around. They would go, four linemen, then they do three. I mean, they mixed it up a ton. And it's it you'd never want to lose a guy like Daly, but it's not as critical with this type of defense and the way that Brian Haynes sets it up, because it is designed already to adapt to what the offense is doing. And then that allows you to put players in positions where they can be successful. And even if they are not people that have accrued a huge amount of stats, there's still a schematic advantage there, because that's shifting around, and the fact that you've got this roster of players and some depth that allows you to adopt different approaches based upon who's out there made it so that I wasn't concerned about it. I was thinking about that throughout the course of the game. It was just kind of wild how that went from being a huge plot line to not a plot line at all. Um, anyway, couple other comments. Dr. R, again, we dominated the line of scrimmage against an opponent full of five stars, masterclass in coaching and schematic control. We've heard next man up from other teams for an awful lot over the years. It's the first time it's held true. The development this staff does is elite. Yeah, absolutely. Um, we might as well talk about this a little bit. It won't be easy, but as soon as OSU and Georgia lost, the championship path became Indiana's to lose. The path seems to be wide open for IU to win the title if they can stay focused and perform cleanly. True. I mean, it's true. And this is a really weird spot for Indiana fans to be in. I mean, to now be the betting favorite to win the national championship is not rarefied air. It's like air you've never breathed before if you're an IU fan. I think Signetti will do a good job at dialing them in. And this is where I got to be honest, like the fact that Indiana gets to play Oregon next, I think is a big advantage, because they've beaten Oregon already. They're not going to be afraid of Oregon. They're going to know their tendencies, and they're going to want to improve on what they did before. Now, that doesn't mean that Indiana's automatically going to beat Oregon. Oregon's a very good team. Oregon looks like they found their stride. Um, but again, I think Indiana's already proven on Oregon's field that they're a better team. Now, that was in October. Things can change, but I don't think Indiana's going to go in there feeling like they're in trouble against Oregon. So the pathway's there. And look, I mean, if Indiana is fortunate enough to beat Oregon, whoever wins that Ole Miss Miami game, both of those teams are very capable of winning a national title as well. So there's a lot of things to think about with all of this. Anyway, we got a ton of comments from you folks. Oh, someone asked, "What is that sweatshirt? Home field?" Yes, this is home field. This is that 1976 football shirt, the crew neck. It's my favorite one. This is my game day shirt. I wear it to every game. Um, let's see. can you talk about some of Indiana's in-game adjustments? It was hard to see watching at the bar. So I'll say this, like the biggest adjustments. Well, first of all, you heard me all say this. If you heard me on the main preview pod or the one I did a couple of nights ago, Indiana on offense had to get the running game going. And the biggest adjustment that they made to get the running game going was actually the same adjustment that they made in the Maryland game. They were having trouble running up the middle. They were running, off guard. And so they shifted everything so that they started running Roman Hemby off tackle. They started running traps. They tried to get him outside of the defensive line. And that was where Hemby, he had that big 20-yard run that he busted. He had several 6 to 8 yard runs. It was a great game from Roman Hemby. And what that did was it really demoralized Alabama because the strength of their defense was stopping the run up the middle. And then they had to widen. And then Kalon Black got going, and Kalon Black able to run directly up the middle. Now he has a slightly bigger hole to do so. So that adjustment, it was something we'd seen already this year, and it was masterful. And it got Indiana to where they needed to get to, which was it got the running game going, and that opened up everything else. The other big offensive adjustment that Indiana made when it became clear that Alabama was just going to try to blitz their way to defensive success, Indiana adjusted the routes and started bringing players in to the passing game that were coming right out of blocks. I think I believe it was Hemby that had a catch coming out of a block that got a first down. There was a play in the third quarter, or it might have been the fourth quarter, where another blitz, Nowakowski blocks, releases, comes out of it, catches the ball, runs for 20 some yards. They made a bunch of adjustments on that front. And then defensively, what I thought was interesting was they they didn't rush, they didn't blitz Sam Simpson the way that I thought that they would. They didn't try to put like a whole ton of pressure on him, but they were getting good pressure with who they were bringing, and they were flushing him out of the pocket. So it wasn't traditional pressure where you're trying to sack the guy, and they eventually got some sacks. But by doing that, and by dropping the linebackers back into a zone and then playing zone over the top, they really made it so that Simpson, I mean, he had several plays where he had to dump it down or dump over to the side in the flat, or some things of that nature. And eventually, yes, he hit a couple of throws, but having to make those throws all the time without a huge amount of time and with not really understanding and citing where the defense is going to be and how they're going to approach things, it made it so that Indiana's defense it wasn't bend but don't break. It was, we're only going to give you a certain amount, and then it's going to become too complicated to do all of this. And that worked really well. So, I just thought that the way Indiana played defense in this game was different than they played defense against Ohio State. And it was different than they played defense against some teams earlier in the year. Same concept, but the way they applied them was very different. And to me, that was a great adjustment. And it was something Alabama either wasn't able to counter or didn't recognize. I'm not sure which one. So. Anyway, I think we're going to end this a little early. Or say early. It's almost 3 o'clock Eastern time. It's almost midnight here, and got to get on the road in the morning. So we'll have more of this. I'll have another session tomorrow. I'll tell you all, Scott is in transit. I'm in transit. We may not have a proper post-game podcast until Sunday. So I'm sorry, but that's the problem when you go across country. Um, yeah, you end up having some structural issues with doing the episodes, but we'll continue to do these. Some great comments, some great questions from all of you here. I appreciate those of you who are up, staying up this late, and we'll do it again soon, very soon, probably tomorrow, somewhere en route. So anyway, we will be safe on the road. Be sure to check out the X account. And as Bear's Mouth is asking for a recite the drives, we want to do that one right. We want to be back in the home studio for that. So we will be back there for that. So keep an eye on the X account, and we'll have some additional content as we stampede back to Bloomington here over the next couple of days. It's been delightful talking with you folks. And Indiana won the Rose Bowl. Indiana's going to the CFP semifinal. Indiana beat Alabama 38-3, 35 points. Celebrate tonight. Celebrate tomorrow too. You've got my permission. Um, Great to see you folks. We'll catch you on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.